this thing? We have another one in my office. Yeah, that's part of the problem. This thing is. What we did last time was to have it here, but if we shake it, then the whole thing wobbles. You think can you keep your hand there? Now probably your hand is not there on the table.
Yep.
But this, as I say, the thing was, if you're not shaking the table, that should work okay.
It might be easier if you point the larger camera toward you, but then you can see what it looks like. Like if you turn the camera around.
I can see it now.
Yeah, but the one on this side is a higher quality camera. So if it
No,
was
but I then can't see
oh, yeah.
if we're cutting my head off. Last time we cut off 5 to 10 minutes of my head. So we want to have me then. Okay, then the second point is, we most of you are familiar with OneDrive, with Zoom, and participating in video stuff. If someone wants to have special concerns, we maybe check with me afterward. But let's ask if it's generally okay to let us. Well, the question is, should we just focus on me? But it's probably better with this smaller class to turn the camera around so people we can show you participating. If anyone is concerned about that. As I say, we can talk with, that is, if there's something which you don't want to say, which you don't want to have recorded, just, we can talk about it afterward in office hours. But I want everyone to be comfortable when we get. So the video should be comfortable for everyone. Okay. The third. Last time I did this, I've had 5 teaching assistants. I'm now catching up, as they now say. Smaller classes. Okay. So we're now switching this over to PPT. It's here. And this one. Let me, as I'm getting going, let me pause for any questions, any folks that are new today that you want to ask about the course generally. And last week, because we had only one day, I'm going to follow up a little more with at the beginning with a little bit of an overview. So if anyone wants to ask questions or continue a little bit of the overview, please comment, question now. What we did was to go through the main sections of the course, and the early sections are basically the more traditional views from the 19th century. The idea of central place theory, of density that people density rises in the middle of the city, and the land value goes down as you reach further and further away. That was the mid-19th century theory. It worked pretty well, it seemed, But every decade, in a later study by Brian Berry showed, that model got weaker and weaker and weaker. And instead we had the most visible revolution against that traditional, in the Chicago version, was called the Burgess concentric zone theory. The LA school of Michael Deere and others said, suburbs are really important. Let's focus on them, and we'll call this the model of the city is the suburb, basically. There are lots of little lower density areas that connect together, and LA is that kind of a city. It's connected by freeways. The so-called downtown Los Angeles looks like a Chicago suburb, whatever, for the most part. Okay. I'm simplifying. There are more, but we have ongoing debates between the Chicago school, the LA school, and the New York school. And they each have bigger theories behind them, which don't just make them about these three particular cities, but they're theories which are being debated and discussed internationally. And these are what we're going to pursue as we go through the sections of the course. So the central place theory has basically been not ignored. These are factors, but they become much more important within individual places further out, and the bigger city or the metropolitan area can be a second kind of reference. That is, one can see how much and where we have the classic factors: density, population size, income, education, the rich versus the poor. That's the classic simple theory that you still learn in some courses, even at this university. But the question is, how much do these explain compared to the past and compared to different regions? So in Scandinavia, you have more class politics, the rich versus the poor, in part because they don't have any ethnicity traditionally. They're all Scandinavians about the same. The US is the total opposite. This is an immigrant society, and Chicago is the wonderful extreme with very proud, distinct neighborhoods based primarily in the past on ethnicity. People from Poland, from Ireland, from Italy, etc. With their proud, and in the early 20th century, they'd kill each other off to try to have representation in the Chicago City Council. Al Capone was the most famous Chicagoan at the time, and is still known, who's still known worldwide. And the revolution is how this is drastically changing. We're getting new kinds of social cleavages of people who are, diversity is one package of race, gender, sexual preferences, etc. These have neighborhoods linked with each of them, Boys Town, etc. And these are another criterion distinct from the traditional ethnic backgrounds and the income rich-poor kinds of classifications, which are all interpenetrating. So President Biden, and we'll use Biden a little bit today because he's been in the news with joining the strike in General Motors, and this matches back with the big point I want to pursue a little bit more in this section of the I'm only going to use it, well, this has got a lot of things here. I have lots of little images I can show you of the general points of the course, but I want to keep the This is one of the big ideas through the course, which we're going to see. We'll elaborate where and how these things work. And this is most clear in the book called Scenescapes. But then where and how these things emerge is what we'll talk about as we move around those. This is more complicated than rich versus poor, or central city, most central downtown versus the outlying area. Instead, we can have 15 dimensions around which people may fight. And in President Biden's efforts to build a particular distinctive orientation, you no longer get the classic so-called New Deal left-right, the European traditional socialist kind of high spending, low spending. We've got this mixed in with who replaces the race of Dianne Feinstein. Race has become more visibly important at the gubernatorial, at the state level, the national level. The reason I started studying cities, and for you to think about it, is we get lots of cases. If you take one nation and try to generalize, is it due to rich versus poor? Is it the Democratic Party? Or is it something else? If instead you've got over 10,000 cities, as we now have, working with people together, we can look at different cities that combine different sets of Detroit with its automobile focus with other factors. That is, we also have race. That is, race is very much part of the symbolism of the workers of the automobile industry in the U.S. But that is the interpenetration of race with income and occupation can't be seen clearly with one case if you had, say, Detroit versus Palo Alto. But if we have lots of places where sometimes you have rich versus poor, but everybody's white, another one everybody's black, more like Oakland, Newark, then we have combinations of these variables that we can sort out, and we find, hey, these different kinds of things are there if we look more closely. And then what we'll see through the course is we can measure each of these things for every block and zip code in the US, Spain, Italy, France, China, Canada, South Korea, etc. This permits us to try to say how important are these different factors, and how then can we put this together here. I'll show you another big point summarizing what I said last time, but this is a little more explicit. The old models are X leads to Y. A major part of what we use through the course, I'm giving you immediately a more complicated version. If this is X1 and X2, and this is the dependent variable, many of the scenes and many of the processes we'll be talking about are more complicated. We have three plus signs, three arrows. So the classic late 19th century model, economic development, more jobs, more people migrating there, and that a major driver of this is even the advanced version of this in terms of industry, the technology industry, Silicon Valley, big tech, which even in China is the hottest thing they're arguing over around the world. How strong is technology in explaining the degree of local economic development measured by jobs, patents, and human capital? Richard Florida and his co-authors really showed in what seemed to be convincing manner, then they built on a lot of others had done the same thing. That this horizontal line right here was the major driver. What we do in the Scenescapes book, and more generally through this course, we're not going to throw out technology, but we're going to say if you only model technology as driving jobs, we should add as well, in this case, there's just one variable, but in fact we may have 10 or 15, or Ed Glaser has a model of 100 variables generating happiness. This is what you can do as we get big data and potentials for analyzing how these things fit together. That is, if we have, and we'll talk more later on, but self-expression is one of the 15 dimensions which I showed you in the last picture. Self-expression means things like letting people in Silicon Valley go to bars and restaurants after work and talk to people from different factories, from different companies. That is, the people from Hewlett-Packard can talk with the other people from others nearby, of course, San Jose, but more generally, this is the, if you will, the socially liberal San Francisco. And the contrast was with the equal competing city, which was Boston. And so Boston had a hierarchical organization of the leading firms, which was, you cannot talk to anybody else. You can't go to a bar if you're working for the competing firm, if you're working here in Boston. And so this hierarchy model was opposed with Silicon Valley. And so if we take, I'm giving you just these two cities, but if you then look at all of the cities in the US, or all the cities in France, such as Grenoble is the high-tech version of this, most extreme in France. But if you look at, you have measures of these, of what proportion do we have of high-tech jobs? How much does that drive? And then, yes, high-tech jobs drive more growth, but if we combine people being able to be more self-expressive, say, hey, I've got some ideas that work in Hewlett-Packard, and they might work for you in your corporation as well, or in your own personal way of tweaking the app and selling a new app separately. If you quit Hewlett-Packard, these kinds of things can go on and are going on actively right now. With all this AI stuff, the AI revolution is then breaking up into little companies and big companies. They're borrowing it, they're going back and forth, they're trying to hire each other's staff. These kinds of dynamics show that we have to have, I don't have to do have anything, but if we build a more subtle model and we then test how strong are paths A, B, and C, and then we can say how strong are these in China, how strong are these in South Korea, how strong is this in France, and is it the same? And how different are their national differences? And is China really that different or not? We can't tell unless we have data for a range of variables, and this is what increasingly possible, as well as we also do case studies of one person, of one factory, of one work team, and look for how these patterns in turn hold. Okay, so this is a carryover of a general point about some of the big things in the class which make this unique and different, and which I did not know. We hadn't come up with these things 20 years ago. This was a huge one. Robert Putnam had recently back before Putnam, who's the classic theorist about American society as an outside visitor? and I'll say he comes from France, and he has his first name, or his last name begins with T. Who's that? Alexis de Tocqueville. What's his theory in a word or two?
That there's sort of a lot of civic associations in America, and that creates a democratic version.
Okay. And a lot of civic associations mean what for, say, an individual? That is, they make it easier for average citizens to build a fence together. So Tocqueville would talk about people in Massachusetts have two neighbors, and you know one has cows and one has cows and other things. The other is a farmer, and the way to keep the cows out of the farm is to build a fence. And if the two people build the fence together, they have a sense of solidarity, of communal sharing, and they work together, and if it works well, they trust each other a little more, and they do more things, and that builds trust and legitimacy of the entire political system. This is the argument of Robert Putnam, who's tried to stress this more. So his famous book was called, I mentioned last time, Bowling Alone, and what's the argument there? What's the title come from? Who's bowling alone?
Young people. Young people, in the sense that, like, his arguments about the third place, right? That people need.
Just a little bit louder.
I said his arguments about what he calls the third place, so people need, like, areas outside of their primary work or home in order to socialize and interact with one another.
Well, the quick, simple answer. Yeah, go ahead.
Was his argument that, and this was like 50 years ago, right? He was saying that Americans have fewer and fewer third places than at any point in American history.
The quick, simple answer is Putnam's theory is Tocqueville's theory. It's the same basic theory. But what Putnam is adding is more recent data, and his basic argument is fewer Americans are joining organizations, including the Boy Scouts, many churches, social clubs, business organizations are in decline. And if Tocqueville is right, and the theory of Putnam is arguing this is still a major driver of explaining how and why the U.S. works politically and socially, and he contrasts, as Tocqueville did, with other countries. Putin right now, for instance, Putin versus Ukraine. This is a little bit of the more self-expression, the more hierarchical kind of battle. That's a huge underlying issue in this respect. Or Trump versus Biden. Trump openly is more in favor of more hierarchy. Numbers which Putnam mobilized were decline. As we have a decline in these organizations, as we don't have these around and fewer people, and you see there's lots and lots of data showing this, it seems convincingly, that as we have more people, first of all, we have fewer organizations around, and we have fewer people joining organizations. He's then imputing or trying to say how much might this lead to less trust and the potential challenge, or challenging in the most visible case of Trump as president, of trying to continue as president when the voters were a little bit perhaps enthusiastic than Trump would have liked. So this is the trial going on right now in Georgia. These issues, Putnam argues, illustrate the degree to which we have less legitimacy in many people who say, we don't, they're lying, they're stealing, we don't trust government, we don't trust the leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And there's lots of data showing trust has been declining for 20 or 30 years. Okay. the the big news. Peter Octoberg, a Dutch guy, came here for a summer, and he and I worked on this. And we said, let's go over the same data Putnam used and ask a question. He doesn't show us in the book. What kinds of organizations are there? Unions, churches, boys clubs, lesbian associations, feminist groups, artists. Are these all the same? Are they all going down? No. They vary, and the big one is this one right here. People who are involved, or organizations were involving participation in education, arts, music, or cultural activities. When we have this is one of the best international studies where we have consistent questions. This was from the World Values Survey. We had 3,000 Americans, and we had similar kinds of things in other countries. But the two that really stood out, which are right here, in the U.S., we chopped off the year here. Oh, okay. 1981 to the 1999, a fairly short period, 20 years roughly. The number of people who were asked, are you a member of, how many of the following organizations are you a member of? And unions were there, churches and so forth, those are all in decline. But these drastically increased by 36% in this short period in the US. In the Netherlands, where Peter Octoberg came from, he just finished a PhD on these issues, 45%. The Dutch really are strong. And why do the Dutch matter as an important, internationally critical country? Hint. Yeah, who will hint? Max Weber. What did Max Weber say that made the Dutch really important for us today? If you're in China, if you're in Taiwan, wherever you're from, you want to understand the Singapore. Who cares about that little country in the past? Why is the Netherlands so important internationally? Max Weber's book, you all may have read or heard about. Book about Protestantism.
I'm just going to guess that it's an exemplar of the Protestant ethic. So we'll use it as an example.
Okay, the Netherlands, but there are other countries that also have Protestantism in part in the U.S., but let's go back, stay with the Europeans, it's simpler. We have parts of Sweden, we have parts of, some Germans are also Protestant. Why is the Netherlands more powerful as a case? What kinds of Protestants were there and are there, and how are they also found inside the U.S. in some neighborhoods, in some regions? The right term here is to the simple question is Calvinism. Calvin stressed that the leaders of the church, that he was fighting against Martin Luther. The Lutherans, and Martin Luther said he started really Protestantism with the Roman Catholic Church. The Calvinists will choose their own local leader for their church, whereas in almost all the other churches, especially the Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Christian Church, most of the Eastern Asian countries with their religious organizations have a top-down type of religious organization. Calvinism was the opposite in Switzerland and those communes, and then especially in the Netherlands. And so you have more bottom-up participation for centuries. And this kind of thing seems to be particularly important, including cultural activities. The arts have taken off. So this is one measure, but then we got a bunch of other things that we'll explore later on. But I never said this 20 years ago. I didn't know it until we found it this way. I never talked about the art. I was interested in some things about the arts, but what we've been doing now for 15 years is looking at where and how the arts really make a difference for participation, for legitimacy, for symbolism, and these are really making a difference in how cities differ and where and how they work, along with income and education and distance, which are the old factors which everybody's talked about for decades. Okay, so these are a couple of our big points which I wanted to show you there. This is a quick overview just showing some other countries besides the US and the Netherlands. So they're extreme over here. those three years, and then the delta is just the change. How much is there a change? And this increase is really high in the Netherlands and the US, but close behind are Sweden, Denmark, Canada, Belgium, Korea, Iceland, Norway, and getting lower over here, Italy and Slovenia. The places that were are more flat, where there are almost no changes, or there may be negative, just 1 second, tend to be China and Russia, Eastern Europe. And they had major transformations in conjunction with this, which we'll talk about as we proceed. But the subtleties of where these work we'll pursue later on. But what I'm putting on the board is a couple of things I did not put on last time when I said some of these things, just to give you a flavor of how important these are. This is just one other bit of evidence. This is the leisure and hospitality. Are there business cycles here? No. This is a quasi-linear pattern. It doesn't go up or down with the economy jumping up and down. This has been growing. This is a consistent pattern from 1939 to 2013. More and more people are working in not just services in general. This is entertainment. This is related to arts and participation and a change in lifestyle in driving cities. These are driving consistent patterns. And read the books, sit and look at the courses. Almost no one has picked these up except a few people that we're now working with. But we then said, is this just American? Is this just the West? And the answer is no. Let me show you a little bit more. The names. Take a look at these names. We all talked for about 7 or 8 years. Most of these people are from Asia. China, Japan, Korea. Plus, the other place, which is an exception besides Russia and China, is Portugal. And historically, Portugal and Brazil don't show more civic activity and more trust. Why? And Portugal is different even than Spain. Portugal and Spain are right next to each other. They all, I mean, the Iberian area and so forth, they're different. And so what we try to do is illustrated here. If we get something fascinating and ironic, or we ask, say, why does it work? Felipe Silva is Portuguese, grew up in Lisbon. He got a PhD at Cambridge, studied in Chicago for a while. Then he's been back. He's on the faculty both in Lisbon and in Cambridge, England. And he thinks about these things very thoughtfully. So we got him, and then our lead Spanish participant, Clemente Navarro, and then of course Dan Silver, etc. And we talked and listened, we mostly listened to the people from Asia. Where and why are these things different? And that is, can Tuckville be revised to include the arts? And what's the biggest art traditionally in the Asian countries? Karaoke. Is karaoke saving things? Traditionally, someone from one of the Asian countries, give us a little conversation about karaoke for the Americans who don't know how important karaoke was, at least. Who wants to tell us that?
Talk about karaoke.
Yes, please.
Yeah, there's you can go someplace. There's have a like TV, and TV you can select a lot of songs. If you can see this song, you can choose it, and with music, and you can sing the song. This is karaoke.
And who is doing this? Who is singing like this? Are they bowling alone? Do they sing alone? No. Who are they with?
We always go together, a group. Like colleagues, friends, we go together, friends, then for fun. We can sing together or just by yourself sing.
But if you have people working in a big factory or a big office,
Yeah.
do they also go to go to bars or these places
Yeah.
after work? So if they work,
Yes.
all day, you work until maybe 8 o'clock at night in Korea and Japan and so forth. They go out and have dinner together, drinks together, and then sing for maybe 3 or 4 hours. This was the classic. You think we work 8 hours a day, or etc. The Asians, this model, karaoke is a critical part of the work exchange. It's part of people they're the same people who work together. Okay, this is now changing as more women are working and more women are more connected with their stronger families. The leaders as women are less often doing karaoke today than 20 years ago. Nevertheless, karaoke is still one thing which we can then, we have data from Chinese villages. How many people perform or sing karaoke? Teenagers, parents, adults, in all the regions of China. And so there are big differences, etc. So then, why is that important in this example for China? They don't have votes for national public officials. They do have votes. They do elect in China in small towns. So we can have voting for the leaders in the smaller towns compared to the higher level elections. Second, karaoke may be more important for many people than voting. But we can try to analyze that by looking at participation rates, voting rates. That is, how much is, what else besides civic organization is down, so is the proportion of people who vote. In Chicago, especially when you get to local elections, 30%, 20%, in many of the wards in Chicago, they elect people, including the mayors, but especially more the aldermen, 20%, 15% of the turnout. So turnout is a big variable which can change the makeup of the political leaders, and that in turn changes the policies which we're getting fought over right now, with President Biden for the first time joining a strike trying to show the continuing Democratic Party tradition of the New Deal, which he's trying to join with visibly the diversity issues at the same in ways that will pursue further as we go on. Okay, let me push on with a few minutes about the section we're moving into. Let me see if I can easily get. Just to show you one example of how we're analyzing this at different neighborhoods by the French team. This is the highest income area of Paris. If you look at other things of how much income drives civic activities or political participation or other things, this is weak. This does money income explains some things, but it's striking compared to the normal conversation. Oh, money explains everything. Aha. Look more closely. Let me push on with the main section after the introductory one is leadership. And I'm using Biden, Trump, Putin. These names are classic ways of identifying leaders and styles of leaders and leadership. Let me go over a couple of the big changes, especially as they affect cities and urban policies in the last 50 or plus years. That is, much of the from the late 19th century through much of the 20th century, we had a lot of rich versus poor. We had a lot of class politics. We had party politics that was classified as left and right. And this is still here. But it explains less and less. And it becomes more complicated as we have new dynamics, such as the most obvious are, say, the environmental issues and social diversity, gender, race, etc. So where and how these things how have these changed in ways that we can identify? And I'll use briefly some extreme cases which are even outside the U.S., but they're similar in President Biden marching with the United Auto Workers. Our reading is Judd and Parkinson, and they use the most extreme case in England it's the English version of Detroit. It had blue collar battling Labor Party fighting with Margaret Thatcher when she was prime minister, and they changed the whole political system as a consequence. But my point is, the same thing has happened around the world, but we're using this because this was well documented in this reading. That is, in the past, national governments, this is especially true, say, in Western Europe, U.S., national governments funded cities. They transferred a lot of money to focus and identify especially the more rich versus poor kinds of socialist and in the case of France, in the early 80s, the president was recently elected for the first time, a socialist named François Mitterrand, Mitterrand. And he formed a government with the communists. And they nationalized many banks and some basic industries, such that from 1971 to 1983, the public sector employees expanded from all firms over 2,000 employees from 20% to 48%. That is, the socialism drastically expanded in those in those years and with these dramatic numbers. The direct subsidies to industries doubled following the vision that there are no condemned sectors, only condemned technologies. Much money went to old industries like steel, but in two short years, things changed radically. In 1983, Mitterrand's Ministry of Commerce came to Chicago with a delegation of 200 French business leaders. I was on a talk show with her and asked what lessons the French might have for the Chicago, at this point, ailing steel industry. This was Pittsburgh and Chicago were the major steel producers in the U.S. This is gone, mostly gone. So I asked, what are the implications for national industrial policy, which is many people were then calling for in the U.S. She laughed and said, do we have anything to offer? Quote, we have nothing to teach you. Let them close down the factories, unquote. Okay, so dramatic opposite of what one might have expected. But in the next few years and around the world, especially the so-called socialist parties, the parties of the left, communist, socialist, Democratic Party in the U.S., have drastically added new issues like diversity, in contrast to the more classic neo-Marxist sets of left and right policies. Judd and Parkinson show that the same shift occurred in several other countries, and they go into detail for Germany, the U.S., Britain. Marty Lipset has a paper. He has many more countries, which he goes into some degree of detail, went through his same kind of transformation within these individual socialist parties. What happened? Considerable internationalization and globalization of these economies in these countries. That is, the cost of building steel parts or assembling computers simply rose too high in many older industrial locations like Detroit and Chicago. The management had not invested in new technologies or been that innovative. This is another factor. Not saying it's one factor, but this is one of the classic factors that we're flagging here. Unions had grown militant in opposing any changes in work rules or cuts in salary. So rather than fight, firms bought more parts from abroad or gradually moved some operations to less expensive cities. These were in the U.S. South and Mexico, and of course, Taiwan, China, in the decades that followed. Jobs declined in the older cities like Chicago and Detroit, and simultaneously there was a talk show I was on called "Is Chicago Dying?" Literally. Fewer persons were needed that is, people are still producing things in the U.S., but the technology has gotten so much more advanced that the percentage of the workforce is smaller and smaller and smaller in traditional industrial activities. Social sector jobs have increased, but steel workers who earned $22 an hour in those years would seldom consider a job at McDonald's for $7 an hour. The chronic unemployment has troubled cities and neighborhoods linked to traditional industries like the southeast side of Chicago, Radoliak's neighborhood of Croatians and Italians, and many African American neighborhoods. And some recent work shows that black unemployment varies considerably by city. This is not a consistent national pattern. You just use national data, blacks are much more unemployed. But if you look at LA, Denver, or Phoenix, there was never much traditional industry, and unions were weak or absent. New industries emerged in these newer cities and have very low unemployment rates today in subsequent years, including African Americans, compared to places like Chicago or Detroit. Faced with these city-level differences, the national coalition of mayors fell apart. Subsidy programs were widely declared failures, and national governments around much of the world gave up trying to lead economic activities in the 1980s. 1989 was the most dramatic, the Berlin Wall, the Russians choosing to end communism as it currently been the case. Markets became much more legitimate, and the idea spread that each city, especially the city government, should and must adapt to its local economic conditions to decide what policies made sense locally. Judd and Parkinson have one important point which they nicely illustrate with specifics. Cities have devised different sets of strategies. Some are highly successful, like Pittsburgh or Rennes. Others are okay. A few for disastrous failures, like Liverpool or Detroit. The last major point is that local leadership thus makes a big difference in how economic and social development occurs. Coherent leadership is their ideal, and this is widely used in other interpretations. How much do we have not just leadership of one person, but have coherence, such as with a strong party, which we also have traditionally since the 1930s in Chicago. So in that sense, Chicago's a wonderful place because it is so different from most of the U.S. This is closer in some respects to Mexico or Korea in having its party politics than does places like Palo Alto, where there's party is barely mentioned. The Liverpool was the most dramatic case, where the union and labor leaders in the council had these confrontations. They tried consciously to drive the city into bankruptcy in hopes that they would be bailed out by the national government. And did this happen in the U.S. for Detroit? Yes. Obama basically, billions, did bail out the whole automobile industry. But then they did so with the condition that there would be no increases in salaries for workers. Now, the workers want 40% increase in the next few years. This is what's being fought over and right now. And of course, the news about how much can we borrow to subsidize these kinds of things has led to the whole potential funding of the Ukrainian war is now being separated out. I mean, this is a drastic change. That is, leadership makes a difference, national and as well as down to the cities. Quote from Mayor of Washington, Mayor of Chicago: Reagan and his mafia considered the cities a special interest group. They believe we Democrats have bought our constituents with social programs. They're determined to undermine us among the poor, minority, students, working people by cutting off funds to those folks. That's what the big spending cuts is all about. Okay, unquote. The confrontations in Chicago and Liverpool were in the mid-80s between local left leaders and conservative national governments. By the early 90s, many local left officials had given up their policies and had embraced market-oriented competition. Eastern Europe and former USSR were the most dramatic, but they still would shift from election to election. The first election in elections in Poland and the Czech Republic, the leading party didn't have a majority, but that a plurality was the Communist Party. The Communist Party still got a lot of votes and a lot of people in those countries after 1989. So these are hot issues around the world. Let me stop here about. Let's have a little more discussion, and we've got stone, city money, and a little bit there. So we have regimes and overlapping themes, which are our topic for today and for Wednesday. Questions, discussion? Yes, sir. You want to mention your name?
My name's Yasha.
Okay.
This is related to what we were discussing right now, but way back when, you said that there are some examples of like Calvinist neighborhoods in the U.S. Do you have any like examples?
Yeah, which neighborhoods?
The Calvinists.
Calvinist. Okay. Definitely. The whole section on political culture has the main reading is Daniel Elazar, E-L-A-Z-A-R, and he divides the U.S. into 3 regions: New England, Middle Atlantic, and the South. And then they migrated western. And the New Englanders were the Calvinists. So the New Englanders across Michigan, so western Michigan is strong Calvinist. They're Dutch Calvinists in places like Kalamazoo, Michigan. Minnesota, North Dakota, Washington State, Oregon. These places have got Northern California. I've got this New England moralism with the Calvinist style of politics. The South is more hierarchical, more clientelism, and in the middle, the one simple title of a book in the middle is Wall Street. Is a book by Donald Trump. Anybody know the title of his most famous book? The Art of the Deal. And the deal is a contract. So that is, so he, at least he generally would say, I don't have a program and a general theory which I'm implementing. I make deals. And Obama made a bad deal with the Iranians, so I'm going to break that deal with the Iranians, and we're going to try something else. And so if you take this contract-oriented view of making decisions, this is drastically different. And where you have aspects of this also in the political machine in Chicago, people will say it's dirty. Politics is dirty stuff. People are, taking bribes and the like. Whereas the style, the battles between these we have within the New England's tradition of moralism, is to say, be honest. And you end up so we'll pursue this further, but that's the quick answer. There are 3 historically sharply consistent, but it's surprising how many of these are still there. If we look, when we have comparative data, we see these still at the present time. Yes?
So I guess you talked about like globalization and like the rise of neoliberalism broadly across the world. I guess why then was the impact on like different cities so disproportionate? Like what resulted in that like inequity? Like Detroit experiencing it much worse than like a New York, or like New York adapting, I guess, better to that kind of change.
Big question. I think the best way is to say we'll look at this through the whole course, and the broad sections, and the way to summarize it is we have five kinds of theories, and they have 5. And so I've been mentioning, say, the Silicon Valley versus Boston. I mean, that's a stress on the hierarchy as making it harder, and a lot of people, for instance, a lot of the U.S. press is contrasting the Ukraine versus Russia. And the sense of hierarchy is leading to less success in the military, and people will then generalize that Russian society in general is more hierarchical compared to the Ukraine, and has that led to more innovation, more growth, more So I mean that's one kind of factor. But the quick point, let me just say explicitly, the readings are gonna not say any one factor nothing is X leads to Y. There are lots of things going on, and recognizing the diversity and the complexity of these is what we will do more, and ideally we'll connect this with empirical data where we can test these competing factors, and then instead of saying this is the driver, we try to say how strong is A versus B versus C versus D. And that's what I showed you with that example of self-expression and technology with that one path diagram. But we'll show how these things can work, but multiple factors is the quick answer. Yes? Go ahead. Blue, yeah, please.
No.
Oh, no, okay, no, you're just waving your pen. All right. Yeah, over here.
Is there an understanding of why arts participation as opposed to other kinds of activities dramatically picked up even as other kinds of associations decreased?
Good question and hard. I mean, the simple answer that many people say, oh, well, the normal answer is arts is what the rich people do. And poor people don't use the arts. I've lived in Bronzeville for most of my adult life. Bronzeville, is 99% plus me. I go to a lot of civic organizations. I'm advising the aldermen and so forth. Toni Preckwinkle was a former student when she was alderman, and she's the one who got me involved in these kinds of things. She's now president of the Cook County Board. Basketball, writing, music, rap songs, taking videos, our kids, young men, young black men, 18 to 25, they're making videos. Sometimes with gangs, sometimes with their friends. They're posting this stuff. This is not just people in Lincoln Park or the affluent of the world. That is, in Italy, what kind of music do they really pay attention to still? Opera. Italian popular music is opera. Not in the U.S. Opera in the U.S. is very elite. There's a strong income educational difference among opera goers in the U.S. is very stratified by income, and Italy is not. So the simple point is it's complicated, and if the National Endowment for the Arts has measured arts participation, but we'll elaborate that more as we go on. But the quick point is, if we include listening to the radio, writing your own rap songs, and you include gospel and a variety of kinds of music that were left out in the traditional measures, there's a weak to zero relationship between many income, educational, race kinds of variables and the participation in the arts. But we've got diverse kinds of arts, some of which are highly ethnically linked, and others of which are not at all. And so we can analyze not only who does more of the arts. We have a paper first on stressing the okay. I won't try to answer that anymore than that quick answer for now. But we will pursue that a lot as we proceed, and we'll have readings that will give you tables on these things. Question? Yes.
I've heard a lot about how sometimes arts districts can be part of a cyclical process where they're what make a particular part of the city interesting, but then those arts districts in themselves tend to be full of artists who aren't necessarily making a lot of money. So the area becomes hot, and then they get pushed out, and it just becomes not gentrified in the same way that it is normally with race, but it becomes kind of a dull, like once booming area. And I'm wondering, is that what you're seeing with some of this data? Like there's a push for the arts, and then it kind of drops off and becomes a more normal city, and then that takes hold somewhere else? Or is it across the board, arts are really booming?
Right. I mean, excellent question, and you've taken the general proposition that the arts are on the rise to bring it down to where and why and that's exactly the kind of thing that we want to do in the course. So that, I mean, that's an excellent, and I didn't say that. You really added that in a way that shows the kinds of things, the kinds of modeling that we're trying to pursue in this course. To try to not say the arts is important or not, but where and why did the artists make a difference? And so in this example, because the neighborhoods became cheaper, abandoned houses and so forth, people with less money, like poor artists who have, you know, no money that they're earning as arts, they may work as taxi drivers or waiters or whatever, but they can rent or they buy a really cheap house. And then we have so-called gentrification. But then that drives out the artists. And so this is the book by Richard Lloyd on our readings called Neo-Bohemia shows this in detail in the neighborhood called Wicker Park. Same thing, Brooklyn and outside New York has done very much the same kind of thing. These both have become much more affluent and driven out the artists. Does the arts impact decline? With some of that, I'm not coming up with a quick, clear study answer to that question, but I love the way you formulated it as a proposition, and I will keep thinking and watching for it. But let's watch it, and maybe we've got something even in these readings. But the quick answer is I can't give you a clear answer, but I love the way you formulated the question. How's our time? I've got
It's like 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay, good. What else do we have anyone wants to raise? Excellent questions. I will often ask you questions if you don't ask me, but we're trying to have more discussion. And as I've said, we're going to feature, at least, we'll feature where we have countries where we have more, at least I only have readings about these, such as we did with Liverpool with this reading, or Mitterrand with France. But the point of that is we want to illustrate multiple contexts and multiple data sources, including and methods. That is, we want to use the ethnographic, the personal, like the Harold Washington quotation or Biden and what they are doing, and Trump, and to try to take an individual. At the same time, we try to look at more comparative data where we can try to say, how and why is this a more general proposition which can make it into social science? What we try to do there is multi-methods, not to look, but that is, every method has its limitations, every approach, every bit of data. But if we look at one kind of pattern and then we say, okay, here's a hypothesis, which we can take this interpretation about the artists may decline in their impact, that kind of thing we can try to look for maybe even different data set than people may have used, or a different way of asking. That is, lots of people have written this as happening as if this is a law, that it happens that way. But where and why, we will explore through the course, looking for things that are cross-national, multi-method, and then what we try to do to make sense of that is the kind of thing I showed you briefly with the 15 scenes dimensions. We're going to try to build theories that don't just have X, Y, or X1 and X2. We're going to put a box around them and say that's city 1 or country 1. Then we're going to have another for country 2 or city 2 or neighborhood 2 and neighborhood 3 and neighborhood 4. that is, we want to build the context into the integral part of the theory. And that's a revolution. Social scientists have not really done this in any coherent way. And so we're trying to change the way that not just social scientists, that journalists, social theorists, political observers, and average citizens who can, if we can try to say, yes, you're right, but how much it depends on these aspects of the context, then, I mean, your interpretation includes the context in that example could be the price of buying or selling a house or a land value or renting in a particular neighborhood, and how much does that transform the impact of the arts. I mean, so the arts can generate more growth, but how much does that in turn depend on maintaining a low rent, and how much does that shift as the context transforms X leads to Y, etc. So those are the kinds of things which that is, I'm pointing this out. Look for that. Don't just look for X1. Look for 1, 2, and 3, and then why do A, B, and C change? Okay, onward. After office hours right now, with anybody who wants to talk a little further. Monday after class is the normal office hours. If you want to hold on to your mask and hold on to them for next class, that would be great. Yes, hello.
Regina, I sent you a couple of emails about wanting to add into the class right now, and we're recognizing the opportunity zones.
Yeah, I think the chances are getting better as we have less turnout. We can't get answers. So maybe.
Okay, yeah, no worries. I sent you an email as well. So I sent you an email about this as
Right.
well, if that's helpful, but.
There are 18 people who have the same concern.
Okay, no worries at all. Okay, sounds good. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate it.
Yes,
So, I'm French, and I really work for the French Cultural Services here.
fantastic.
And I was particularly surprised of the low percentage, like 8% of the graph of the French people interested in the arts and the culture, because it's like something we spend so much money about, and even like abroad, and I don't know if you know, but in Chicago, like there's like an architectural biennial that's currently being organized by the French government, and I was particularly surprised to see that low figure.
Okay.
Has it changed in the
Well,
last 20 years?
the big point is France is the most important country in the world in using the arts for centuries. And so that Versailles, I mean, Versailles was the model for the world, and so, you know, the Russians, everybody came to Versailles, and that style of using the arts and the lifestyle of cultural sensitivity, you know, the gallery, the miroir, etc. So yes, so France is, we will elaborate for sure, but but the simple point is there wasn't a change in the thinking back on that data. And you're right. I'm glad you're raising it. We want to give you more subtle answers, and maybe I won't try to do so now, but we want to especially explore just one example. The Ministry of Culture collects these data better than most any other country in the world. And so they've shown in ways that we don't know for other countries. So I haven't used it so much here, but the young French have been dramatically increasing their cultural activities through downloading over cell phones and seeing, showing videos and so forth.
I don't know if you know this, but after COVID, the French government gave every young adult between 18 and 24 €300 to spend at movie theaters, in books, in
I
like
know,
theater.
I didn't know that. That's great.
It worked really well then.
Now, I would say, I mean, if you can bring this into our discussion, these are, and if you're working with them on,
Yeah,
with a.
so I work for the Villa Albertine, which is a French cultural service.
That's terrific, and I've worked with them because, I mean, I lived in Paris for 5 years, I went twice. So, I mean, I've had a lot of contact with the French. So this is great.
Okay.
We want to try to, tell me your name.
Tom.
Okay.
Tom.
What's the full name?
Tom Claire, Klehr.
Excellent. Okay, let's try to build on that.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Hi, so I have sometimes I won't be able to make it to class since I have another commitment. And I saw on like Canvas there was lectures under different years. Do you recommend like a specific year to watch the lectures, or are they just all the same?
We will have this year in another day or two.
Oh, okay.
So the you don't worry for that. I would say
Okay.
we'll have the ones immediately.
Okay.
Soon posted.
All right, because
On
I didn't
YouTube.
see the first lecture.
Yeah. It will be
Okay, great. Thank
very
you.
soon. Okay.
I had a question on the grading. I saw there's like 4 or 5 options we can choose of like what combination. Do you need us to like email that to you, or like how do you want that communicated, or can we?
Yeah, I'd say wait until we maybe
Okay.
get maybe halfway through almost there.
Okay.
And then because you may get more interested as you read
Sure.
about more things than maybe in your mind right now.
Okay. Fair enough. Thanks.
Good.
Yeah, just a quick question about the point that you were making about Calvinism and the Netherlands. I'm just wondering, as you were saying, because of the...
If there's anything you want to talk about personally, I'll shut this off, but I'll just leave on a little bit.
Sure.
But for now, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Sorry, I didn't manage to catch the last part. I think I tried to ask a question, but I think the movement just went over. I think you said something about how the ethic of certain religions actually
The ethic of what?
of religion,
Religion.
yeah,
Okay.
kind of facilitates the increase in participation in the arts, right? I was just wondering, why is it that we are seeing
Oh,
this?
no, I mean, Putnam's theory is not, he does not mention the arts.
Yeah,
He says participation in general.
yeah,
He has one little table about the arts
yeah.
and really doesn't pay attention to that.
Right. Okay. So, to clarify, do you mean that you were, I guess, looking into what Putnam was trying to generalize and trying to understand,
So slowly, trying to generalize, okay.
the arts?
But be careful. I mean, I wouldn't try to say we want to generalize
Okay.
that saying arts are always important. We want to just say where and why
Okay.
is it more important or less important. And so his example about gentrification, that the artist may be important at the beginning
Yeah.
of a neighborhood and then decline. I mean, that's the kind of interpretation that I would say we want to try to build a model about where and how it actually works, not looking for one variable or whatever.
Yeah. Sorry. Back
Okay.
to the question.
Okay,
on,
so go ahead if you elaborate, if you didn't elaborate so
Sure.
far.
Religion.
Okay, religion.
My question is, why is it specifically that point that we bring in religion to understand the increase in participation in the arts?
I see, with the Netherlands and the U.S. as examples. Yeah, I would say the theory of Tocqueville and of Putnam is not specific to the arts. And the case of Peter Achterberg coming here and us discovering that, I would say, and we have in the book, which we can take a look at, is called Kentuckville Karaoke with a blue cover. That is, we begin that is the, I would say rather I'm showing you by my hesitation to say there's not a simple answer. And we link that most explicitly in the last chapter of that book, where we look at multiple things and where and how the context shift other things. But through that book, we have people exploring different versions of that. But I would say, I mean, the simple answer is these are big issues that are being explored right now. And one of the most interesting and important is China, as where and how do the arts matter? And China is so big, so important, and the changes are faster than in other countries that we see, even though it's not in the Western press, there are many local variations which our Scenes Academy has been identifying. There are many dramatic local variations, and where the arts are more important or less important, including rural traditional regions of China are drastically changing with the penetration of cell phones and migration and families where you have people migrating for part of the year and they go to work in Beijing and they go back when they for longer, etc. So that is, there are many things that we're getting more data about which can begin to pull this together, but there is no clear simple answer which I can give you, I would say, except let's look more closely at the arts as we're beginning to find how important it is. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Okay, good.
Just
Yes.
a technical question.
Sure.
What are expected readings for, like, the syllabus doesn't really say different dates and stuff, so what are the expected readings?
It's the week. It's not the day, but it does have the
like,
week.
because last week was, so what are we in now? That's my question.
Yeah. I mean, I will, if I'll say we'll try to cover one thing in a week, I will do it during the week, but I won't necessarily say that Monday and Wednesday will be totally.
No problem, but are we on leadership, or did we move on to, like, because there are?
We're continuing. It's as it says in the syllabus. Week 1 is leadership, Monday and Wednesday.
Right, okay, so this is week 1?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. So this is good point. we're in week 2.
Sorry, just trying to figure it out, that's all.
Okay, no. So in that sense, we yeah, okay. So the
Wednesday we have class? No, this Wednesday have
yes,
class?
yes.
Yeah.
Very Monday
Yeah,
and Wednesday
yeah.
we normally have a class.
Okay, so
That is,
just to cover
we will be, because we will finish up including markets, which is B, on Wednesday. So we will. So that's a good point.
Okay, thank you.
I think because we missed like the Monday class
Okay.
last week, so
Yeah, I
everything
know.
got pushed.
Right, but that's what
Right.
organized.
Yeah.
I don't have any fun. I'm the TA.
Yes, I'm happy to see a jacket, a tie. We have.
I have 2 questions. So do I have a grading rubric for the stuff to grade? Because my duty is purely grading, if it's correct.
Yes, so we will be 97% of what I've said is in the readings.
So do I have a grading rubric for the students? Because if
We're slow. Do we have a what?
you will have a grading rubric for the students, that's
Yeah.
kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to answer that when we talked about it or email about it.
Yeah.
I think, namely, we try to say the numbers, but that is based on what I've seen, the discussion, and what we've had in the past is, well, I won't try to mention some distributions, but I will simply say I've almost always been highly consistent with what the TAs have come up with independently, so I wouldn't worry about that. Although it's at the beginning of the quarter, and for one individual TA, there's, we may be very different. When we've had 5 TAs, we've ended up amazingly similar.
Okay.
And how it gets graded.
Second question, what's the procedure for me to work with you to do the gradings?
Yeah, to send me a list of the grades with the names and the copies of the exams,
Mm-hmm.
and I will then look closely at those which are borderline.
Okay.
So let's say the A minuses. So if they're 82, is that an A minus or a B plus?
Okay.
I'll look at those more closely, and I will say, he's a little bit too tough. Then I'll try to, but I'll have your numbers.
Mhm.
So I won't change. I'm not going to read every single exam or
Okay.
that is. But what I may do is, let's move up the proportions where the cutting points are between A minus and B plus and so
Okay.
forth a little bit.
So no quota system, my initiative to basically set up the portions, and basically once I'm done with the gradings, I will send it to you, and you have the final authority to change basically the grades.
Yes.
Perfect.
But I mean, if everybody does very, very well, we can give everybody A's.
Well, no, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, but that is, we're not saying we must have.
Okay.
And in general, the quality of the exams have gotten better for 20 years. That is, and this shows in the college entrance CEB that all the classic general exams show where the students are getting better, and it's wonderful.
Okay, that's it. Good to
Okay,
see
well, welcome. Delighted you're here, and delighted we're working together.
I might not be able to participate in person because I do have a time conflict.
Sure,
with my
no, of
schedule.
course. That is, as you see, let me